Good evening. It's so nice to see you here at our 2022 Spring Conference meeting. It is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Valerie Carr, a renowned civil rights leader, lawyer, award-winning filmmaker, educator, innovator, best-selling author, whose book, See No Stranger, we have in the back available for purchase. Valerie also was kind enough to sign book plates for us. So when you purchase your book, you will have a book plate to include in it with her signature. Valerie's vision of her revolutionary love project is deeply rooted in her Sikh faith. She grew up in the farmlands of California, where her family lived as farmers for more than a century. As a child, whenever she felt lost, her grandfather would give her Sikh wisdom through song and point to the path of the Sant Sifa, sage warrior. The sage loves, the warrior fights. It's a path of revolutionary love. Please join me in welcoming our keynote presenter, Valarie Kaur.
Thank you so much. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. The beloved community belongs to divine oneness, and so does all that it achieves. Thank you to the Northeast Conference of the UCC for the great honor of spending this hour with you all. I know that I'm in need of community right now. I'm on the road in Santa Fe, and just a few hours ago, I got a notice that a very beloved friend, a longtime Sikh brother, is now dying of stomach cancer, and he will be transitioning any minute now, perhaps during our hour together. And so I come to you with gratitude that I don't have to hold this moment of his transition alone. And so in honor of him, dedicating this hour to him in my heart, I invite you to begin with a few deep breaths with me. Are you ready? You can place your feet on the earth and notice the difference between holding your body up and letting the earth hold you up. You can close your eyes for a moment and feel your feet on this sweet earth. Imagining now the indigenous ancestors of the land beneath you. If you know their names, you can say their names now. The Tewa peoples. Honoring their strength, their resilience, their wisdom, past, present, and future. And now I invite you to bring to your mind's eye an ancestor. In my case, a soon-to-be ancestor. I see his face now, radiant, smiling, filled with love. Whoever you choose, I ask you to bring to your mind's eye someone who, when you think of them, makes you brave. Can you imagine them standing behind you now? And notice what courage feels like in your body. And now, my love, I invite you to notice, imagine all of the ancestors we are summoning right now, filling this space, turning this virtual physical space into a sacred space. The power of all that love summoned and consolidated at once. Can you notice that? Good. And now, holding that image in your mind with the feet on the earth, your sisters and brothers and siblings by your side, and ancestors at our backs, I invite you to take a deep breath. Let it come. and let it go. And one more time until all the parts of your body that need it, let it come. And let it go. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You can flutter your eyes open, you can stretch, and in this hour together, may we hold them in this space with us. I'd like to begin with a story about how I see this era in history that we're living through, and then share with you why I believe revolutionary love is the call of our times. And then explore with you how we might put that into practice in bolder and braver ways than we've ever had before. Are you ready? Not too long ago, I was sitting at home playing with my daughter in our living room. It was more like I was spacing out because I was just so tired. And she proceeded then to stop the play and climb up on my shoulders and sit on my head for a good minute. She then climbed back down and looked at me with the sweetest smile, a touch of pride. And she says, looking straight in my eyes, she says, "Mommy, I went number one on your head." At which point I turned to my husband and I said, "I think it's time for a break. Mommy needs a break now. Let's take a break now." I don't know if any of you have had small children through this pandemic, but she had a diaper on, but still, this is how it has felt like on top of me all of the time. So a few weeks later, we decided as a family that we would leave the house. We would take a road trip to the mountains. And we decided to go into the Sierra Nevada mountains, the mountain range just outside of the farmlands where my family has lived and farmed for a century. So I know these mountains well. But we decided to enter a part of the forest that I had never been to before. And as we made our way down the slope, everything started to change around us. The trees were as wide as pillars and so tall that we had to crane our necks back to see the tops of them. It was like entering a cathedral where the dust motes floated in the sunlight and time stood still. These are the great sequoias of Sequoia National Park. They grow only on the western slopes of the Sierra Nevada mountains. These trees live to be 3,000 years old. Indigenous peoples for thousands of years have called these trees the ancient ones. And so even my children, my rambunctious children, hushed their voices, proceeded in quiet because they knew they had entered a sacred space. We began to follow signs for the largest living tree on earth, and I soon discovered that it was called the General Sherman. Now you can imagine I got quite worked up when I discovered that the greatest living tree on earth is named after a man who killed a lot of people in battle. And so as I'm getting worked up, my son, who is 6, he knows me very well. He's like, "Mommy?" It's like, "Uh-huh. Okay, Mommy, let's just call it the great-grandfather tree." "Thank you, Gubby." Mommy calms down. So we follow signs to the great-grandfather tree, and we sit at the foot of the tree, and I'm nursing my daughter, and my son is sketching the tree next to me, and I just gaze up. 27 stories. Can you imagine? And I begin to try to envision all of what this tree has witnessed in the last 2,200 years before the birth of Christ. Early ancestors, reigns and ritual, conquest and cruelty, epic love stories and world wars, social movements and stabs towards freedom, spacecraft and social networks, pain and pandemic and silent prayers. Through all of that history, this one solemn tree has stood in this one solemn place and witnessed us. Now, the great-grandfather tree, it looks as though it is standing alone, but it is supported by all the trees around it. Deep beneath the earth, their roots connect and create a conscious network known as the mycelium. These trees, we've discovered, they send each other information and warnings. If there's fire or disease at the outskirts of the forest, the trees in the center know about it. If one of them is sick, other trees send it nutrients through the earth. These trees practice empathy. They know that longevity and resilience are only possible in community. We spent all day in the great-grandfather tree in the giant forest that surrounded it. Once, when no one was looking, I put my body against one sequoia and I could feel it breathing. We breathe in what they breathe out. The children, they were laughing and playing and praying and skipping and singing. No one went to the bathroom on my head. I mean, all in all, it was a successful day. We promised we would come back. Four weeks later, a lightning storm ignited the KNP complex and windy fires, and the giant forest was surrounded by flames. Kavi and I, we saw images of the front page of the newspaper of firefighters desperately wrapping foil around the great-grandfather tree. And so Gabi said, Mommy, we should give them the prayer. Do they know the prayer? My grandfather's prayer, the hot winds cannot touch you. You are shielded by love. And so every night we sang this song before we went to sleep. Days went by and weeks and months before the smoke cleared. And when it did, the giant forest was still standing. The great-grandfather tree is still there. But they counted 3,600 sequoias fallen in the forest, which means that we have lost 20% of the world's population of sequoias in California's superfires within just 14 months. These trees have lived for thousands of years, only to die en masse in our lifetime. And now, as the mega drought persists and bone-dry vegetation builds and the earth continues to warm, we know that more fires are coming and coming and coming. I can taste the ash in my mouth. Can you taste it? I mean, I can literally taste it as New Mexico is on fire. I can't be outside because of the smoke. Can you taste it? And notice how that taste is familiar. I know that I've tasted it when I see the faces of loved ones sick or dying from COVID from behind a screen, and I cannot touch them as they begin to transition. I know I tasted it on the day of the insurrection when my brother-in-law was trapped in the Capitol building and we saw bloodshed in the Capitol, and we were grateful that he made it out alive. But every day since then, as we've seen one of two political parties in the United States call that day legitimate public discourse, that we are hovering between a democracy and an autocracy for the first time in history. I can taste that ash in my mouth. Every time I look at the latest images from Ukraine, the trenches in Mariupol filled with the bodies of children, when we thought that wars in Europe were a thing of the past, I can taste that ash in my mouth. Since the leak from the Supreme Court, it feels like a hand reaching under my skin, reaching, stealing my dignity, my autonomy, my ability to decide when, whether, and how I bring children into this world and make family. I can taste that ash in my mouth sometimes when I put my babies to sleep. And I know that with rising hate violence and state violence and anti-Asian hate, that I'm raising small, sick children in a nation more dangerous for them than it was for me. I was 6 when I heard my first racial slur. My son was 4. And for all my tools, for all my advocacy, I know that I cannot protect him when the violence comes for him, not in the street, not in the schoolyard. I can only make him strong enough to face it. When have you felt like you were looking into darkness? You are not alone, my love. This is what I wish to tell you. The future is dark. But the mother in me has the audacity to ask, keep asking, what if? What if this darkness in our nation and in our world is not only the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? What if our nation, our world, is longing to be born? What if all of our ancestors, those who survived genocide and occupation, slavery and assault, racial violence day after day, like my dear sick brother, I can feel him standing behind me now, standing behind us now, whispering in our ear, you are brave. You are brave. What if this is our greatest transition? The midwife says to breathe and then to push. So I invite you to take another breath with me. Are you ready? Let it come. And let it go, for we need to be bolder and braver than ever before in order to face this moment, in order to ask ourselves, when is it my time and how do I push? For in birthing labor, transition is the final stage in labor. It is the most painful. It feels like dying. And yet it is the stage that precedes the birth of new life. In transition, one world is dying while a new one is struggling to be born. My loves, I believe that we are alive in this era of transition for our nation, for our world, for our earth, for our species. And that you, each of you, as ministers and spiritual companions and guides, clergy and laity, that you, as custodians of ancient scriptures, where love without limit is the song that we hear again and again, that you are the midwives in this time of transition, tasked with surfacing our deepest courage to be able to lead with love, to evolve human consciousness enough so that we might imagine a world where a human being is a human who knows how to love well. And this is why the greatest social and political crises of our era are fueled by a deeper spiritual crisis. The choice to stand for some of us rather than all of us. And so what is required now is nothing less than a revolution of the heart, an invitation to a new way of being and seeing that leaves no one outside of our circle of care. What I call a love without limit, revolutionary love. This is why I believe that sound government is necessary. I'm a trained lawyer. I know we need just policies, but the only way to make those policies last, to build and maintain just institutions, if we create a shift in culture and consciousness. And that is our task. That is the true and lasting revolution, the revolution of values that Dr. King has called us to. And that requires us to reclaim love for a new time. And so my offering is this: revolutionary love. I imagine each of you, and I know you've heard this call to love for many years. That's why you're here. Perhaps you heard it as a child in church. Perhaps you heard it from a grandparent. Perhaps you heard it later in life, but it's why you're here. And so as I'm speaking to you about revolutionary love, just know that I am touching a wisdom that you already carry. Love is our birthright. I am just surfacing it a little bit more and inviting us into a new definition of love, because our culture doesn't know how to talk about love, does it? Our culture mistakes love as a rush of emotion, something we fall into, but we know that love is more than that rush. Love is sweet labor, fierce, bloody, imperfect, life-giving, a choice we make again and again and again. I remember when my son was first placed on my chest and I was shaking and sobbing from that rush of emotion. I'm like, this is love. I'm falling in love. And I was, and there's a place for the falling. In the meantime, my mother next to me was opening up her bag and taking out her dal and chol and beginning to feed me. I mean, I don't even know how she brought it into the hospital without me. She's beginning to feed me. She was feeding her baby as I fed mine. And I looked at my mother, and now I see that she knew what I was just beginning to learn. That love is sweet labor. And when we labor in love, then that labor contains all of our emotions. Joy is the gift of love. Grief, the grief that I feel right now as my friend is dying, the grief so many of you have felt in this time of so much pain, the grief that you have tended to. Know that grief is the price of love. The deeper you grieve, the more you have loved. Joy is the gift of love. Grief is the price of love. And anger, rage is what we harness to protect that which we love. And when we choose to love beyond what evolution requires, or maybe perhaps now evolution requires it, when we love beyond our most intimate circles, when we choose to love others who don't look like us, when we love our opponents who we want to hate, when we love on ourselves who we too often neglect, that is what I define as revolutionary love. So revolutionary love is the choice to enter into labor for others, for our opponents, and for ourselves. This kind of love has been on the lips of our spiritual teachers, social reformers, indigenous healers for thousands of years. As long as that great-grandfather tree has been standing, we have heard this call to love, haven't we? And now our very future as a species depends on whether we can put that ethic into practice in ways that we never had before. Can we structure our societies on the ethic of love? Can we realize the vision of Bell Hooks? She imagined a society where the love ethic is the foundation of every arena of public life. What would that look like? What would that feel like? I have a vision of a future where every home, every house of worship, every school, every community, every industry, every neighborhood is a container for beloved community. Beloved community where we are living into right relationship with each other and with the earth. And beloved community is not pie in the sky. It's not a future that is devoid of conflict. No, it's that we are solving those problems together in ways that honor and affirm the dignity of all of us. Anti-racism is the bridge. Beloved community is the destination. And if beloved community is the destination, then it's time for us to start to build capacities for how to love well here and now. For I believe that revolutions happen not just in the big, grand public moments, but in the spaces where people are coming together to inhabit a new way of being. And so in my life, I have spent the last 20 years organizing around hate. I have made a promise, I've taken a vow to spend the next 20 years organizing around love. If love is our birthright, then all of us can practice it. You can teach others how to practice it. And so my work now is to help us demystify love. That too often we put our heroes up on pedestals, we turn them into saints, and in doing so, we drain them of their power. We're saying that we can't be like them, but once we see that they were imperfect and messy and wounded just like us and could still walk paths of love, then we've released their true potential to be ancestors who help us now with the task at hand. So this is what I've come to offer you all, to make an offering that I wish to put in your hands. I spent some time in the rainforest, a year, and it really felt like the womb. It was warm and wet and safe and generative. It felt like the womb. And in there, I spent hours pouring through scriptures and stories and lived experience and the neuroscience and history and psychology and ethics and our ancestral wisdom. And I began to see patterns and practices of what I call revolutionary love. And I identified 3 main practices and imagined them as points on a compass. This is the tool I wish to put in your hands. And if this doesn't serve you, you can just let it go. But if you are a visual learner like me, you perhaps will find this delicious as I do. Are you ready? I'm going to talk you through the compass, and know that you can always explore it more at seenostranger.com. So here we go, a whirlwind introduction. We define revolutionary love as a choice to love others, opponents, and ourselves. Imagine that you're holding this compass and you turn it toward an other. That practice I call see no stranger. The words of Guru Nanak, Nako beri nahi bagana. I see no enemy, I see no stranger. That initial practice is wonder. Notice that I don't start with empathy to feel as another, or compassion to feel for another. Empathy and compassion are tools, are orientations that ebb and flow, come and go, but you don't need them. You don't need to start with them to enter a labor of love. You only need to begin with wonder. Can you look upon the face of anyone or any being and say, you are a part of me I do not yet know? Practice is simple. When you walk down the street and you see faces, even behind masks, can you say sister, brother, sibling, beloved, grandparent, child? And when we're doing that, we are retraining our eye to see all others as kin. It sounds like a simple practice, but it's actually revolutionary because we all carry implicit bias within us. And we know that brain imaging studies show that we experience that bias before conscious thought. Our brain decides whether the face in front of us is one of us or one of them before we even know it. And so if we then decide as the next conscious thought to say sister, brother, or if family names don't serve you, I see you as a part of me I do not yet know, we're training our eye to see no stranger. And when we see differently, we do differently. Who we see as one of us determines who we help in their time of need. who we open our doors to, who we take in as refugees, what policies we support, what leaders we elect. Demagogues succeed when they effectively shut down the imagination of entire groups of people to see others as less than fully human. And so to encourage us to teach one another, ourselves and our children, how to see no stranger, to keep wonder alive, is to say, you are as vast and complex unto yourself that I am to myself. It is an orientation of humility. And when we move through the world with that lens, then we open ourselves to each other's stories and to each other's grief. That's that next practice. There is so much grief around us right now, isn't there? I know that you're carrying so much in your heart. You've tended to so many who are grieving. This is what I wish to tell you, that you know that there is no fixing grief. There are no right words. There's only bearing it, witnessing it, accompanying it. And when you accompany it, when you help someone accompany their grief, then it's surviving it. You don't need to know people in order to grieve with them. We grieve with them in order to know them. And when we do so, we gain information for how to fight for them. And that's that last practice, that all of us have the ability, everyone you tend to, make sure they know that they have the ability to do one thing for those in harm's way. All of us have a sphere of influence. All of us have the one thing that only we can do. Wondering and grieving and fighting, these are the elements, the recipe for what I call deep solidarity. Shallow solidarity is rooted in the logic of exchange. I show up for you, so you show up for me. I went to your vigil, you show up for mine. But deep solidarity is rooted in the ethic of love. I show up for you because you are my sister. You are my brother, my sibling. I choose to love you. And that kind of solidarity lasts and lasts. What story of solidarity have you lived? Have you witnessed? Where have you seen love alive like that? I know that as a Sikh American, the only way I am here now, after 20 years since the horror of September 11th and all of the hate violence against people of color that followed September 11th, the only reason I am here now is because people saw me as sister. After Balbir Singh Sodhi was killed, he was the first person killed in a hate crime after 9/11. He was gunned down in front of his gas station while planting flowers. The man who killed him called himself a patriot. I saw Balbir uncle as uncle. And again, when our people were killed, I remember looking into the open caskets of people who looked like my family members and feeling like I was going to fall into the abyss, the darkness of the tomb. When the doors flung open and thousands of neighbors flooded into that gymnasium, and they didn't have to know us, but they choose to love us, to show up with us, to weep with us, to wail with us. And anytime people who have had no obvious reason to love one another have come together to grieve, they've given rise to new relationships, even revolutions. So my invitation is to say, every time we have seen those acts of solidarity, they've been seen as aberrations, but what if we could make them the norm? What if standing up for one another, hearing each other's stories, weeping, eating with one another, fighting for one another, and then eventually singing with one another? Because when we are in relationship like that, we let joy in. And so what stories have you not fully let into your heart or into your congregation? Who has your congregation not yet sat with and wept with and broken bread with? Who have you not yet fought for because you were scared you were going to say the wrong words? It's okay, my love. You just show up with your whole heart, with your open eyes, with your open ears, and let yourself be changed by the relationship. And then you'll know how to keep showing up in community, in solidarity. So that is that practice of seeing no stranger. But when we're fighting the good fight, there comes a time when you shift the compass and the person in front of you is an opponent. I know this is the challenging one. And so I'm going to walk you through this. Notice I do not use the word enemy. An enemy is a fixed and permanent identity. An opponent is a fluid category. An opponent is anyone whose beliefs, actions, or words oppose your own. And here's why I call them an opponent, because I have come to understand there are no such thing as monsters in this world. There are only human beings who are wounded, who do or say what they say out of their insecurity, out of their greed, out of their blindness, out of their desperation or despair. That doesn't make them any less dangerous. But when we choose to see them, to see their wound, they lose their power over us. It frees us. And then, if this gets really pragmatic, we get to ask ourselves, what are they listening to? What echo chambers are there inside? What algorithms? What stories? What policies? What leaders? What cultural norms shape their worldview? Why are they clinging to that story? Why? What is driving their harm? And when we gain that, then we are smarter about how to create change. Not just about removing a few bad actors or putting a few white nationalists behind bars. No, this is about culture shift, about telling the stories in which they might see themselves too. Notice that tending the wound begins with rage, tending our own wound first when we have just survived harm. This is really important. As a woman of color, as a spiritual woman, I was always taught that I was only as good or as polite or as faithful as my ability to suppress my rage, to choke down my rage, to rush to love or forgive or civility. It took me a long time to learn that when rage is choked down like that, it wreaks havoc inside of one's own body. You get sick. And so the solution is not to suppress your rage or to let it explode like so many men and boys are conditioned to do. No, my love, your solution is to process your rage in safe containers, the way many of our ancestors did. The drumming and the screaming and the shaking and the running and the dancing, the moving the energy through the body. And only once it's here, it's outside of you, you can be in relationship with it and ask, what information does my rage carry about what's important to me? How do I wish to harness this energy for what I call divine rage? The aim of divine rage is not vengeance. It is to reorder the world. Now, I know you might be thinking, oh, but my faith tradition really doesn't allow me to touch the depth of my rage. And I just say, I think we need to look closer. Think of the fury in the eyes of Jesus when he overturned the tables of the money lenders in the temple. Think of the ferocious dance of Kali, destroying in order to bring forth the new. I think of the 10th Guru Gobind Singh Ji going into battle against the oppression of empire, harnessing that divine rage. The aim of divine rage is not vengeance. It is to reorder the world. And so for some of us, that work that's showing up might look like listening to our opponents. And that's that next practice, is to listen. We don't listen in order to compromise with them or legitimize them or control them or change them. No, we listen across lines of difference to understand them. When the goal of listening is understanding, then transformation might take place, but it might not. And that's okay, because you are gathering information about your opponent's wounds in order to reimagine solutions that might set all of us free. I know that this is challenging because I carried so much grief and so much rage after Balbir uncle was killed. Year after year, I only saw the murderer, Frank Roque, as a monster. I couldn't bear myself. I couldn't bear to wonder about him. I didn't have the spaciousness inside of me to do so, and that was okay. Until 15 years later, I returned to the gas station where Balbir uncle bled to death, and I put roses on the spot where he died. And I sat next to Rana Sodhi, his younger brother. And Rana looks at me and says, "Nothing has changed." And I said, "Ranaji, who have we not yet tried to love?" The next day, we called Frank in prison. And at first, I thought it was a terrible mistake. He refused to take responsibility. "I'm sorry for what happened to your uncle, but I'm also sorry for all those killed on 9/11. And I thought, I could feel my rage. And perhaps I needed to feel my rage to protect Rana, give him space. And perhaps that's why Rana could continue to wonder about Frank and listen to him. And he could hear what I could not hear. Rana says, "Frank, this is the first time I have heard you say you were sorry." And Frank says, "Yes, I am sorry for killing your brother. And when I go to heaven to be judged by God, I will ask to see your brother. And I will hug him. And I will ask for his forgiveness." And Rana said, "We have already forgiven you." Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is freedom from hate. My loves, I want to tell you that last night, Rana called me and told me that Frank Roque has just died in prison. Nobody knows this yet. He died the night before, and Rana says, perhaps he's asking to see Balbir uncle right now. Perhaps he's hugging him. And we wept. Ranaji and I, we grieved this man who might have been forgotten otherwise. And I invite you to, if you are willing to grieve him with me. For he taught me in my conversations with him, he taught me that so much of white nationalist aggression is a symptom of unresolved grief. They're grieving the notion that this country ever belonged just to them in the first place. Frank taught me to see the wound in my worst opponents, to see their humanity. And in doing so, to preserve my own. He helped me preserve my humanity. May he rest in peace. My mentor, Parker Palmer, calls revolutionary love the new nonviolence because it makes space for our grief and our rage and the idea that everyone has a different role in the labor at any given time. And so as you're hearing the story about Frank, this is what I want to tell you, that, if you have a knee on your neck, it is not necessarily your role to look up at your opponents and try to wonder about them or love them. Your role is to stay alive, to take the next breath. That is your revolutionary act. But if you are someone who is brave enough, safe enough to tend to those kinds of opponents, to the Franks, to the potential Franks in your life, we need you now. We need you in that labor. We need you to sit with your congregants and your neighbors, your kids, your colleagues. We need you in that long and sustained labor of listening to them, tending to their wounds. And we might not see their redemption or transformation in this lifetime, but like Frank, it took 15 years and we saw it. To hold out the possibility itself is a revolutionary act, because we are saying that our vision of a multiracial, multi-faith America, the nation that is waiting to be born, leaves no one behind, not even them. And so this brings me to the final practice: how to love ourselves. This practice I take from the wisdom of the midwife who says to breathe and then to push. For so much of my life as an activist, I thought I was only as effective or important as my ability to grind my bones into the earth. That if I didn't sleep very much or if I skipped a meal, it just showed how hard I was working. That my trauma was nothing compared to the people whose stories I was amplifying, uplifting in the world. And therefore, I wasn't worthy of tending to. All I knew is how to push and push and push. I thought I had to make myself suffer in order to serve. If this sounds familiar, this is what I want to tell you. That the midwife knows that there is a kind of rhythm, a cadence to sustaining oneself over any long labor. She doesn't say push, 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 push. She says, breathe, my love, and then push, and then breathe again. There's a dance, a rhythm, for a recipe for longevity. And so my question to you is, how are you breathing today? Who are you breathing with? Are you breathing with the earth, with the sea, with the stars? Are you breathing with meditation, with music, with prayer and poetry and song? How are you letting breath into your body? I don't think self-care is a very useful term when we are staring into the abyss, when we are so breathless in this time of transition. We need community care. No one goes to battle alone. No one ought to give birth alone. We need each other. So who will help you breathe? Who will be your midwife to put breath in your body when you forget? Who are you reminding to put breath in their body when they forget? Who will push so that you can breathe? Who will you push for so that they can breathe? If we can develop communities of care, then we can survive what I call transition. That in our hardest moments, our darkest moments, when the voice inside of us says, I can't, that is precisely when we must summon our ancestors at our backs, those who make us brave. That is precisely when we draw on the midwives at our side, that we know that transitioning ourselves is how we transition the world. For this, the only way that new world will be birthed is if witnesses to collapse and survivors of trauma see themselves not as victims, but as pioneers of a new way of being human. We have to be more resilient, more able to metabolize grief, both locally and globally, more imaginative and courageous and loving than ever before. So these capacities that I'm offering you, I invite you to ask which ones you feel like you got and which ones you feel like, I need some of that in my life, in my church. Perhaps you're like, well, we know how to love others. We're building bridges of solidarity. We got that well, but we're not taking care of ourselves. We don't know how to let joy in to the labors. Or perhaps you're doing the work of loving on your community well, but there's yet the hard work of building bridges with opponents. And so you can ask ourselves at any given season, where is your congregation focusing in any given season? Where is each congregant focusing in any given moment? Where do you need to put your energy? For the deepest wisdom inside of you knows what you need. And this is just a tool to help you say, now I need to breathe. Now is the time to push. Now is the time to grieve. Now is the time to find safe container for rage, or now is the time to let joy in. And joy is that 10th practice. Joy gives us energy for that long labor. Joy returns us to everything that is good and beautiful and worth fighting for. And this is what I wish to leave you with. I believe that if a critical mass of us, if each of you as midwives in this era of transition show up to the labor with our whole hearts, with our whole being, then we will birth that world to come for our children and their grandchildren and their children. And if some of us don't live to see that future, if I might not live to see that future, if I show up with love and with joy, then my labors are not just a means to an end. They become an end in and of themselves. I have come to believe that laboring for a more just and beautiful world with love every day can be the meaning of life. For this is what I know to be true. We will plant seeds for future great-grandfather trees. And 3,000 years from now, they might remember those of us who planted them. Even 100 years from now. You will be someone's ancestor one day. You, my love. They will gather in spaces like this, virtual spaces, hybrid spaces, sacred spaces. They will gather in spaces like this and they will summon you. And if we show up with our whole hearts, with all of our love, our revolutionary love, then what they will inherit from this era will not be our fear, but our bravery and our joy. Thank you so much. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa. Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
I'm sorry. I wanted to ask you to speak a little bit. I noticed that your, the cover was about treating others as you would have them to treat you. And that's what it said on the announcement. But I wanted to talk, I wanted you to kind of bridge that for me, if you could, with the practices that you named. How do you connect those dots?
Yeah. May I be a little subversive here? as the sick woman, as your sick sister invited into this beautiful space, may I be a little subversive? I think it's time for us to evolve the golden rule a little bit. It's time for us to treat others not as we wish for them to treat us. It's time for us to treat others as they wish to be treated. And I say that because when we are loving others who are different from us, truly different, that beginning of learning to love them well can't be a projection of what you think they want or need. It must begin with humility, with surrender, with wonder. You are a part of me I do not yet know. And so if we get really curious about how to love others the way they wish to be loved, then we build our capacities in order to love well. I say this because as a Sikh American, my people, we wear 5 articles of faith. One of them is long, uncut hair. Our turbans that many men, that my dear Sikh brother, who I'm holding in my heart right now, the turban that he wears, it's a sign of his commitment to love and serve. How ironic that that very sign has been what has targeted him and so many of my Sikh brothers and fathers and uncles for hate in this country. We need you to see us. We wear these articles of faith so that we will not hide. So that if you need food, you can come to us to feed you. If you need shelter, we will shelter you. to love us well is to see us well, to ask us questions about who we are and how we are and what we need. And so my invitation is for you all in this time when we need to be bolder and braver than ever before, is to reimagine the golden rule as one that is anchored in revolutionary love, to love others in the way that they need to be loved. And let that be the beginning. Oh, okay. I'm just imagining with you, like fire season is coming again in California. And if this time the giant forest catches on fire and the great grandfather tree burns, I will wail. I will wail. I will sob. I will cry. I will let myself feel this grief. You are a part of me I do not yet know. We are part of these ancient beings. They are part of us. So I would begin with letting myself grieve well and finding others who are willing to grieve that boldly with me. And then in the grief, I will touch the tinge of my rage, because it ought not to be this way. We knew that the climate crisis was upon us, that this mega drought, the worst in 1,200 years here in California, could have been prevented if enough of us, especially those in positions of power, took the actions that we needed to take to stop the climate crisis. So yes, I would feel rage. And unlike my previous versions of self, instead of trying to get really polite and proper with those words, I would let myself feel that rage, scream, curse, dance, drum, vent, find safe containers for my rage. And once I can move with that energy, and it's a dance, right? I'll come in and out of it. Then once I move enough of it here, I can say, what information does my rage carry? It means I want to protect the trees that we have left. I want to raise our consciousness to be able to plant new trees. And that means fighting for the right policies and electing the right leaders, and perhaps marching in the streets and writing the stories and teaching our children. I would then harness that energy into divine rage to reorder the world, to make this world safe enough for a new generation of sequoias. And that practice, that process, Audre Lorde says it's like us listening to a symphony to dance with our rage, right? To step away to rage, to return to listen, to reimagine solutions together. I would find people doing that together, congregations, communities doing that together, amassing the wisdom for us to imagine a world where we might plant trees that live 2,000 years from now. That's how I would use the compass to live out revolutionary love for that tree. I see your chat. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Valerie, we cannot begin to thank you enough. I remind you all that we're all going to take a deep breath now so that we can prepare to worship.
May I make one more offering? We are truly building a movement for those who are taking this ethic into their lives and into their communities. And in the last few months, the last 6 months, there have been many congregations around the country who say it says, love thy neighbor in our scriptures, but how do we make good on it? How do we operationalize it? If you resonate with this, if any of what I've offered you feel could benefit your community, I invite you to take that compass and run with it. It is yours. Sermon series, book groups, service projects, whatever you would like to do. If you go to seenostranger.com, you'll see a learning hub with guided meditations and inquiries and curricula. All of it's for free. And then tell me how you're using it, because I'm in this for the next 20 years, 30 years. I'm your sixth sister, calling forth, bringing forth the love that you each practice every day and spreading it. So let us journey together. Thank you for that honor.